Welcome to the Paperless Productivity Podcast, where we have experts give you the insights, know-how, and resources to help you transform your workplace from paper to digital while making your work life better at the same time.
Thanks for joining us today. My name is Steve Dale, and I'll be your host as we talk with Yakima County about the value that they have received leveraging e-filing and workflow. A handful of years ago, the National Center for States Courts recognized that there isn't really a single CMS in the marketplace that satisfies, every need of the court. And they developed the component model, which allows for a standards-driven approach to courts to pick and choose the best-of-breed pieces of functionality that extend the capability of that CMS. With me today is Therese Murphy from Yakima County. She is the District Court Administrator, and she's here to share a bit of their success story about leveraging the component model. Welcome, Therese. Therese, could you give us a little bit of background about yourself and the challenges you were experiencing prior to implementing e-filing and workflow?
Sure, Steve. I can provide you with some background. As Steve mentioned, I'm the Court Administrator for Yakima County District Court in Washington State. It's a court of limited jurisdiction, and what that means is we are essentially the workhorses of the court system in this state. There are by far many more courts of limited jurisdiction than there are superior courts. And just to give you a bit of an understanding of what that means, on average, courts of limited jurisdiction on an annual basis receive in excess of 2 million filings a year. Now that compared to the Superior Court, which is the upper level trial court in our state, they on average receive anywhere from 250 to 300,000 filings a year. So you can see that just in those numbers, we are a much larger court presence in our state, and we actually do a lot more work than the other courts that exist in our state. And so I, along with a number of folks in my operation, one of them being Tamara Williams, who is also on this podcast, a supervisor for me, were challenged by trying to manage the paper within our court. 3 years ago, we were told we launched OnBase 3 years ago and TrueFiling 3 years ago, but we were advised by our county board of commissioners that we would have to do something with the storage facility where we keep all of our files because they were going to rip it down. And that, in fact, did happen. And we had over 100,000 files in there. So we needed to figure out how to manage that. And our solution to that problem really was OnBase and TrueFiling and working with vendor ImageSoft to get us off the ground. And so about 3 years ago, we actually launched TrueFiling OnBase at the same time and have been working with it ever since.
That's great, Therese. I know that Yakima uses workflow for civil, criminal, and civil infractions. Can you just provide an overview of how the court is leveraging workflow today?
Sure. The beauty of OnBase and the workflow component within OnBase is the ability to uniquely configure it to our needs. So Steve mentioned 3 separate and distinct case types that we have within our court. Now, when we're thinking about that, criminal is separate and distinct, and it actually has its own workflow process. Infractions are separate and distinct. They also have their own workflow process. And civil is definitely separate and distinct and has its own workflow process. And with each one of those case types comes different volumes or amounts of work attached to them. So just to give you some context, just so you have an understanding of what we're talking about here. In the world of criminal, the criminal case can last for 3 to 5 years. We're managing that case, and it could be much shorter, it can be much longer, but traditionally a case will expire within 5 years and will be done. On an annual basis, we anticipate that we manage about 500,000 pieces of paper in a criminal case through our workflow process in OnBase. That represents about 17% of our overall work. In the world of civil infractions, which are your traffic infractions, speeding, those kinds of things, we actually get only about 162,000 pieces of paper is our estimation that we have to manage in OnBase, but that work represents about 57% of our total caseload. And then you get to civil, and I should say regarding infractions, those go quick. So you get a speeding ticket, you have so many days to resolve that ticket, you get it resolved, and we only have to retain those documents for 3 years. So those are done and out of our OnBase system within 3 years. It's just over. Criminal stays a little bit longer, and civil stays even longer. Civil can last up to 10 years. They can be processing that case through our court system, and then we have an additional 3 years beyond that to retain it pursuant to retention schedules. What is unique about civil is it only represents about 25% of our workload, but it represents the vast majority of paper in our court. So we anticipate we have about 750,000 pieces of paper come through our court on an annual basis in the world of civil, and we use OnBase to help us manage that. Now, when we're talking about workflow in each one of these different components, my answer began with the fact that we get to, within the world of OnBase, we get to actually uniquely configure that workflow to meet the needs. So let's talk about that. In the world of criminal, that actually, those cases initiate in what I refer to as an external process with an external program that has absolutely nothing to do with OnBase, TrueFiling, nothing. It's already an electronic process that is managed by the state AOC. So an officer will cite someone for an offense through their sector program, and that's done electronically. It's transmitted to the court electronically, and because of OnBase's configurability, we were able to ingest that electronic filing from a separate system outside of OnBase. OnBase, it makes that happen through a workflow process, just going onto our network and grabbing those documents and then pulling them into the workflow process. And every single one of those documents has its own workflow. It depending upon the doc type, it will go to a variety of different queues, and everyone goes a little bit different based upon that document and what work needs to be done on that document. So that's kind of cool with OnBase. We don't have to worry about so much the fact that we have this external program that really has nothing to do with OnBase or TrueFiling. OnBase is actually able to connect to it and pull that information for us. So that way we can bring it into our system and work it as we would want to. Then you talk about civil. This is the same kind of, or civil infractions rather. That's the same kind of process. Those come in through sector as well. And so we're able to pull those into OnBase, much like we are criminal. Civil, that process actually is where we launched TrueFiling, and that was a game changer for us. So we started using TrueFiling right out of the gate, and while we didn't mandate it, we found very quickly, and I know Tamara will probably address this in some of her responses as well, we were able to leverage TrueFiling, and the filers really appreciated it and liked it. That is the way that we get our cases, our new civil filings, and any subsequent filings, frankly, through the TrueFiling system into OnBase. And so within OnBase, obviously, we have a number of different queues. That's how it works. You have a number of different queues in OnBase. And within those queues are several different work processes depending upon the doc type and the case type that we've assigned to those documents that are coming into the system. And we are very, very fortunate to be able to have the ability to create those workflow processes based upon our needs. So that's highly configurable within OnBase to be able to do that. And so that's essentially how we use workflow and how we use the eFiling solution, TrueFiling, within our system.
Yeah, it sounds great. It really expanded upon a number of the different improvements leveraging the OnBase workflow and even some of the integration. And you talked a bit about TrueFiling. Tamara, what's your opinion on how TrueFiling has changed the court?
TrueFiling has been a godsend for our courts, honestly. We no longer have to keep physical files. That is probably the biggest change for our court. We used to have, as Therese mentioned, a room plus an old storage facility that held thousands upon thousands upon thousands of files with millions of pieces of papers in them. And just to have those gone, it's just amazing. You now have all of those documents that would have been in those files readily available at your fingertips. If someone calls in for a question on a specific document, you don't have to go rummaging through, thousands of files looking for that piece of paper. You can simply type in the case number, even if it hasn't been processed in our judicial information system. It's in OnBase. We can see it, and we can provide that person with the information right then and there on the spot. We used to employ multiple volunteers, sometimes 40 hours a week, to come in just to file and sort paperwork for us to get it into the file, so that we could have everything together. And we don't have to do any of that anymore. I mean, it's just been amazing to not have to have all those physical files and be able to have the documents right there at your fingertips when you need it.
So to follow up on Tamara's response, and she's absolutely correct when she talks about the overall time savings within the civil department specifically. I will tell you that yes, we've been able to actually reduce costs as a result of implementing both OnBase and TrueFiling in our court. And the one area, and this is just one of hundreds of areas where we've actually been able to improve our processes, is particularly telling. So when someone actually initiates a paper filing within our court, in the old system, there were 6 separate processes that the staff had to go through. Those 6 processes, before it was filed, before it was all done, those 6 processes, pre-OnBase, post-OnBase, were reduced to 2 processes. No longer did we have to date stamp all the documents that were coming in. That was all automated. We didn't have to separate them and send conform copies back to the filer. That was all automated through TrueFiling. If something needed to be signed by a judge, that didn't need to be put in a stack of paper that they would come and grab and pull back into their office and sit at their desk and sign it. Instead, now it routes through workflow into a queue that the judge actually sits there and provides an electronic signature through TrueSign. Once it's back in the queue, the clerk does have to docket it in our statewide case management system, but then it's just sent to the file. There's no more looking for the file. There's no more filing it and having those volunteers or any other paid staff to do that work. When I did a calculation on this just to get a sense of what the time savings was, I will tell you that the year that I prepared this, which I believe was 2018, there were 6,500 new civil suits roughly filed. In the old system, it would have taken us 65,850 minutes to process those new civil suits. In the new system, it takes us 19,755 minutes. It's an overall 70% time savings and an overall cost savings about $15,000. And so that's just the new civil suits. That doesn't include all of the ex parte orders and whatnot. Again, even in that scenario, it's a 70% reduction in workload as a result of the employment of TrueFiling and OnBase in our court. So we have had some definite, real, and meaningful changes in our business process that have translated into an overall cost savings and I know an overall satisfaction of court users and court employees as a result of having this new system in our court.
Thanks, Tamara and Therese, for the answers on that. That really sounds great. I'm curious now how satisfied people are that are using your court services now that you've implemented eFiling and workflow.
Honestly, they were very resistant at first. We had to, as Therese said, kind of, coerce them into the e-filing. After about a month of getting into the routine, e-filing everything, we have had multiple parties call and tell us how wonderful e-filing it is. One of the biggest things about the e-filing that the filers love is that they get their conformed copies back the minute that the button in the workflow is pressed. If it's a judgment that had to go to a judge, the judge signs that judgment. As soon as he hits the button that says judge complete, it kicks off a workflow that not only brings it into one of our other queues within OnBase for the clerk to see, but it automatically goes back to the filer's TrueFiling history, and they have that document sometimes within the same day that they filed it. And that is probably the biggest thing that we have heard from our filers that they just love about TrueFiling. I mean, not only does everything, get to come over electronically, it saves them time on their end also, but that's probably the biggest thing is that they get their conformed copies back. I mean, in the paper world, it could sometimes take 4 to 6 weeks for a paper judgment to come into the court, get it all processed, as Therese said in her answer to the last question, get it to the judge, get it signed, get it back to the clerk, and then have time to get that document conformed and back in the mail and back to the filer. So 4 to 6 weeks versus 2 to 3 days, they are just, our filers really, really like TrueFiling to the extent that we get questions almost on the daily about when we get to put our old civil files into OnBase that aren't in there yet, because we started fresh when we went to the TrueFiling OnBase systems. We started just in the summer of that year, and so we've still got many cases that they have to paper file on, and they don't like that anymore.
So filers are thrilled. That's great. It's a great step. How about employee satisfaction with the new implementation?
I have to say it's about the same. Resistance at first, but now they prefer it. I actually have an employee that comes to me about once a month and asks if we are ever going to mandate e-filing, because we do have some filers who still file in paper. But yes, our employees really like it. They would actually prefer that we mandate it and we make everyone e-file, because it's just a much easier process all around. One thing, I reached out to a couple of my employees just to get some feedback, and one thing I had not thought about is with this whole COVID pandemic going on, we've had to have some employees work from home, and because we have TrueFile and OnBase, she was able to work from home and still be able to do the work she would do if she were in the office, because she has everything at her fingertips. As soon as it comes through TrueFile, she's able to get what she needs and get the job done, and does not need to be here in the office to get that job completed.
So we talked about a few of the players already. We talked about the staff and employees. We talked about the filers. And certainly, last but not least, how about the judge? How has OnBase been as a judicial tool for the judge?
So I think the judges, much like with everyone else in the court, change is not comfortable. And so, at the beginning, it was a little bit of a challenge. But once the unknown became known, it certainly has been a tremendous benefit to the judges, and certainly something they don't want to lose. In fact, I know that they've oftentimes said to me when they're in court and someone hands them a paper file, they're very disappointed because they would rather not have to flip through a paper file. one of the things that's been kind of great about OnBase, and I think great on both ends, pre-OnBase and pre-TrueFiling, pre-everything, when we're doing it the old way, a lot of the work fell on the clerk because there was a lot of preparation, a pre-preparation before they went into the courtroom, forms and whatnot. Many of them, those things were never used. And so they were just tossed if they were never used. We were just anticipating what was going to happen in the court. Well, when we switched it over and went into OnBase, a lot of the tasks and responsibilities that the clerk had switched to the judge. And so in our solution, the judges are the ones that prepare the automated forms that are accessible via OnBase. So if it's a judgment and sentence, it's the judge that's completing those documents. And so we're only completing the documents we absolutely have to have completed. And so we're not wasting a lot of paper and a lot of time. And the judges have a lot more control over the work that they're generating, which is something that I know that they appreciate very much. And since Tamara mentioned COVID, I think that that's also been an interesting experience as it relates to OnBase. So the court now has switched to doing a lot of virtual hearings. So a lot of our cases are being held in a virtual environment, primarily on the Zoom platform. And one of the things that's really great is that as the judge is generating a JNS, for example, they're able to actually share their screen, their OnBase screen, with the document that they created and filled out with the participants of the court hearing, so they can actually see it. In the normal world, pre-COVID, even with OnBase, we were not able to do that at that moment in time. And so that's been kind of an added benefit, having OnBase on the virtual platform for court hearings. And then I would say, I think just in general, the judges really appreciate the organization and the accessibility of OnBase, much like the staff person that Tamara referenced in the previous answer. A lot of the judges are rotating in and out, and they all now have computers at their home, and so they're able to work from home and access their OnBase queues and do their work from a remote location, not having to be here at the court. And so that's been a huge benefit for them, and I think something that they very much appreciate. So I think initially it was a struggle. Now I don't think they would want it done any differently. And in fact, they're always looking for new and better ways of doing things. Can we automate more things? And so now they become definitely a partner and a voice for that change that we will continue to do in the court moving forward.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned the judges wanting some new things. What are the two of you looking forward to most in future enhancements?
Well, I can name of one thing, and Tamara may have some stuff too. We have a wish list, and one thing that we really want to leverage is Sharebase, and I think that is a system that could benefit us in the long run significantly. It probably comes to no surprise to anybody. A lot of the work that we do has to actually be shared with other people outside of our organization and outside of our system. So just as an example, when someone is convicted of an offense and they're required to report to the jail, we send that judgment and sentence to the jail. And so they are not in our organization. They're not in OnBase. They're not in any of that. So now we have the ability to send it through another platform. But we think that Sharebase would be a better platform, and we can automate the sending of that. Right now, it's somewhat dictated on the staff to make sure that the right button is pushed and the right selection is made to get the document where it needs to go. And we think that with Sharebase, we will be able to automate the sending of those documents and, in fact, the receiving a lot of those documents. So then we can avoid the uploading and downloading process, because we really don't want to do that anymore. We want to be able to bring it in seamlessly into our system. So that's something that we're definitely looking at implementing in the near future.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, on the civil end, as you've heard how many documents we get, Of course, number one on my wish list is being able to bring all of our old civil files into OnBase and start using eFiling on those old civil cases.
Well, Therese and Tamara, I really appreciate you being on with me today. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. I'm impressed with all the work that you guys have done. And for our listeners, we appreciate you downloading this podcast. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about ImageSoft, please visit imagesoftinc.com. This concludes the podcast for today, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks again for joining us on this podcast. To learn more about ImageSoft, please visit imagesoftinc.com. That's imagesoftinc.com. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to Paperless Productivity, where we tackle some of the biggest paper-based pain points facing organizations today. We'll see you next time.